Iraq actually is a perfect example of the way the whole system works. So we economic hitmen are the first line of defense. We go in, we try to corrupt governments and get them to accept these huge loans, which we then use as leverage to basically own them. If we fail, as I failed in Panama with Omar Torrijos and in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos, men who refuse to be corrupted, then the second line of defense is we send in the jackals. And the jackals either overthrow governments or they assassinate. And once that happens and a new government comes in, and boy, it's going to toe the line because the new president knows what will happen if he doesn't. In the case of Iraq, both of those things failed. Economic hitmen were not able to get through to Saddam Hussein. We tried very hard. We tried to get him to accept a deal very similar to what the House of Saud had accepted in Saudi Arabia, but he wouldn't accept it. And so the jackals went in to take him out. They couldn't do it. His security was very good. After all, he had one time worked for the CIA. He'd been hired to assassinate a former president of Iraq and failed, but he knew the system. So in '91, we send in the troops and we take out the Iraqi military. So we assume at that point that Saddam Hussein is going to come around. We could have taken him out, of course, at that time, but we didn't want to. He's the kind of strong man we like. He controls his people. We thought he could control the Kurds and keep the Iranians in their border and keep pumping oil for us. And then once we took out his military, now he's going to come around. So the economic hitmen go back in the 90s without success. If they'd had success, he'd still be running the country. We'd be selling him all the fighter jets he wants and everything else he wants. But they couldn't, they didn't have success. The jackals couldn't take him out again, so we sent the military in once again, and this time we did the complete job and took him out, and in the process created for ourselves some very, very lucrative construction deals. We had to reconstruct a country that we'd essentially destroyed, which is a pretty good deal if you own construction companies, big ones. So, Iraq shows the three stages. The economic hitmen failed there, the jackals failed there, and as a final measure, the military goes in. And in that way, we've really created an empire, but we've done it very, very subtly. It's clandestine. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's an empire, then who's the emperor? Obviously, our presidents of the United States are not emperors. An emperor is someone who's not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and doesn't report to anyone, essentially. So you can't classify our presidents that way. But we do have what I consider to be the equivalent of the emperor, and it's what I call the corporatocracy. The corporatocracy is this group of individuals who run our biggest corporations, and they really act as the emperor of this empire. They control our media, either through direct ownership or advertising. They control most of our politicians because they finance their campaigns, either through their corporations or through personal contributions that come out of the corporations. They're not elected, they don't serve a limited term, they don't report to anybody. And at the very top of the corporatocracy, you really can't tell whether a person's working for a private corporation or the government because they're always moving back and forth. So, you've got a guy who one moment is the president of a big construction company like Halliburton, and the next moment he's vice president of the United States, or the president who is in the oil business. And this is true whether you've got Democrats or Republicans in the office. You have them moving back and forth through the revolving door. And in a way, our government is invisible a lot of the time, and its policies are carried out by our corporations on one level or another. And then again, the policies of the government are basically forged by the corporatocracy and then presented to the government. They become government policies. So it's an incredibly cozy relationship. This isn't a conspiracy theory type of thing. These people don't have to get together and plot to do things. They all basically work under one primary assumption, and that is that they must maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs.
Crazy facts about the trial of Saddam Hussein. In May 2005, the then US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein and offered him the chance of freedom if he appeared on television and requested that armed Iraqi groups entered into a ceasefire with Allied forces. Saddam rejected the offer and instead went to trial. During the first hearing in the trial, Saddam, appearing without counsel, rejected the charges that were aimed at him and said this is all theatre, the real criminal is Bush, as well as suggesting that the trial was akin to a play to help Bush win another election. He also challenged the legitimacy of the 5 5 judges, and after being asked to identify himself by one of the judges, Saddam said, "You are an Iraqi, you know who I am." In December 2005, Saddam heard testimony of 3 anonymous witnesses who were tortured by Iraqi guards, including a 16-year-old girl who alluded to the fact that as well as being tortured, she had also been sexually abused. After the 3rd witness, a man, testified that he was taken by security forces along with his family, and Saddam said, "Does anyone ask Saddam Hussein whether he was tortured? I live in an iron cage covered by a tent under American democratic rule. You should come and see my cage. The Americans and the Zionists want to execute Saddam Hussein."
حتى لو كان أحد منكم لا يصلي بالدستور الدولة، سواء الدستور اللي وقعه صدام حسين ومؤمن به أو الدستور المخترع اللي ملاه المستشار الأمريكي على العراقيين، الإسلام دين الدولة. أنبه مرتين على وقت الصلاة لكن تهمل.
لا لم تهمل، لكن الشاهد
كيف ما تهمل؟
لا يمكن مقاطعة.
كيف يؤجل رب العالمين، يؤجل حق رب العالمين ويسمع لإفادة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبد ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ديني.